This is so exciting to see this big of a turnout. I'm so thrilled. I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to introduce myself to everyone, but I'm Erin, and this is Stranded in Asia, and I can't thank you enough for joining me this evening. I know May is quite a busy month for all of us, but I appreciate you taking an hour out of your time to join us for some reflection on travel and some connection on human connection. Yep, I'm off to a good start. So, with that, maybe a video to get us started.
Of course.
Say hello.
Hello, hi.
Ni hao. Ni hao.
It might seem strange to you, my friend, that some things are always heaven sent. The more you want, the harder it gets. The more you let go, the more you get. It's a crazy, beautiful life. It's a crazy, beautiful life. Some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful life. Nothing lasts forever, someone told me so. Life is always changing, ain't what you think you know. Even if you're standing still, you're floating in space. So grab a hold of your heart and you'll find your place in this crazy, beautiful life. In this crazy, beautiful life. Some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful life. Wherever you are, whatever you do, whatever wishes might come true. Whatever you got, whatever you give, you make it a beautiful life to live. It's a beautiful life. It's a crazy, beautiful life. Some things make sense and you don't know why. It's a crazy, beautiful
To the adventure.
What months were that? September?
I was in Asia from June to December of 2017. So those are just a few of the faces of Gui Ren, and before I jump into what the story of Gui Ren is, you should probably know what it means. Gui Ren is a written Chinese phrase that means the right people coming into our lives with synchronicity to help guide us, inspire us, lead us. They're people that we meet in our everyday interactions that may come out of unexpected places. And so, but before I jump into the Gui Ren story, I want to tell you a little bit about myself first, because before that story, there is a backstory. So once upon a time, I was a child, and I played with building blocks. How many of us loved this classic childhood toy? So I was thinking about how to present this information to you today, and I was realizing that there is so much that we can relate back to childhood. And in building these awesome creations and structures, we use specific blocks that fit into specific places, and we have this great idea of this structure in mind that we want to create. And we get to pick the colors and the shapes, and then we get to knock it all down and start all over again. And life is kind of like this. So this entire journey was kind of like playing with building blocks. It was trying to craft a specific structure and then realizing that I was missing a piece, knocking it down, and starting all over again. So these were the building blocks that I had to work with before I left the country. I went to high school at Wellington. I graduated in 2013. I'm not trying to age anyone, I'm just giving you information here. I went to Butler University in Indianapolis and graduated in 2017. And I graduated with a degree in digital media production and a minor in journalism. And I thought I was on top of the world. I had it all figured out. I knew what I was doing with my life. I knew where I was headed because at Wellington, I was a part of so many clubs and after-school activities and varsity softball. I was so involved. My resume for Butler was outstanding. By the time I went to Butler, I was in so many honors fraternities and a sorority, and I was so involved and participatory that by the time I got my degree, this was my ticket to the rest of the world. This was what was going to define my future. Back in high school, I had the opportunity to feed my very first taste of wanderlust. In 2011, I went to Chile with a group from school for 2 weeks. We stayed with host families, and then we traveled to Santiago as a school group. And I got a taste of what it was like to travel internationally. So I went back 6 months later, worked as a lifeguard at the Upper Arlington pools all summer to fund my ticket back, to stay with the same host family and get a little bit more of that taste of international culture. And in spring of 2013, I stuck with the same color scheme, and I went to France. We stayed with host families, and then we went to Paris for a while and explored there as well. So I had a little bit of taste within the confines of a school program of what travel could do for me. In Butler, during my collegiate years, I studied abroad for a semester in Western Europe. So I had the chance to go to 5-6 different countries with my friends and with my professors and learn about culture and history and get a little bit of taste of that human connection. I joined Couch Surfers. Anyone heard of it? It's not just for surfing couches, it's also for meeting up with people and locals. And so I ended up in this one family's house eating traditional Dutch meatballs and talking about politics, religion, humanism with people I had met 20 minutes prior. And I realized just how phenomenal these connections could be. And I came home being known for the person who would talk to any stranger along the way. So the summer of 2016, my junior year, going into my senior year, I took an opportunity to take a school trip to Shanghai, China. And on this trip, we did a 6-week internship with an industry in our field of interest. And at the time, I was working with videography, photography, web design, but I wanted to kind of dive into an unknown territory. And so I decided to work in sustainability and corporate responsibility. And so I worked for someone who connected me with international leaders from all over the world. We interviewed people about their business practices and their ethics and their motivation to succeed as a leader in this world. And I got to be involved not only in this interview process, but in the storytelling that came after. I got to connect with leaders from all over the world and share my story and then share theirs. And it was a truly phenomenal experience. And so when I went home after that 6-week internship, I continued to edit for him remotely, and I continued to use Dropbox, and all through the cloud, we were able to continue to work on the projects that he was filming over there. And so in February of 2017, when I got an email that included expenses obviously covered, equipment provided, salary to be discussed, awesome, bleep guaranteed, I said, I'm listening. He wanted me to come back for a 3 to 6 month project where I would continue the work that I had been doing with him. Expenses paid, equipment provided, salary was $7 an hour. But he was going to take me to at least 5 different countries, connect me with business leaders from all over the world, help me build a demo reel for when I got home to help start my career, and all of the expenses and equipment were going to be covered. I had to make a tough decision, because a lot of college seniors would say, well, no, that's not in the books. I'm supposed to take my degree, I'm supposed to get a 9-to-5 job, I'm supposed to start climbing that corporate ladder and eventually get rich and have kids and settle down, and it goes on. And I thought, well, if I take this job, I'm leaving that stability. I'm gonna have to do it all over again in December when other college graduates were beginning to prepare for graduation. I was going to be old news in the world of college graduates, but I did it anyways. because I'm an adventurer at heart, and I couldn't say no to an opportunity to travel through Asia, meet business leaders from all over the world, and tell fulfilling stories that would not only enrich the lives of everyone around the world, but also my own. So I said yes. I did the math. I had a bachelor's degree. I had international work. I would have international work experiences. I would be networking with global leaders. I was all set for job security and endless opportunities. So in spring of 2017, I boarded a plane to Shanghai, China, which if you have a second to go to my website and read that blog post about that first plane ride over, it will not disappoint. To make a long story very short, my bag was searched for a giant knife that my seatmate claimed I had. Gets interesting from there. So 2017, they pulled out a giant stuffed bunny instead, in case anyone was wondering. They said, "Honey, where are your parents? What are you doing?" And I said, "I honestly don't know." So here's what I knew going into it. I knew how to navigate the metro. I'd been there before. 6 weeks gave me enough of a foundation. I knew where to locate the best baozi, delicious buns. I knew the wonderful world of WeChat, which is a social app that all of China uses to communicate, and it also includes booking cars, booking movie tickets, ordering food, paying your utilities. It is all of America's apps rolled into one. They are ahead of the times. I knew how to use chopsticks. I knew what type of power adapter I needed. I knew how to say hello and thank you, and I knew what the currency looks like. What I didn't know was literally everything else. I couldn't speak Mandarin. I didn't know how to get my first apartment, let alone in China, in Chinese. I didn't know where the grocery store were, or how to read Mandarin, or how to read anything that I was consuming. All of that was a mystery to me. I had to learn to become vulnerable very quickly. Vulnerability is not something that we like to practice very frequently because it means that we are less than knowing. We don't have all the answers. Who likes to go into something and not know the answers? You can raise your hands. No one? Cool. Awesome. That was effective. I was terrified to go into this, but part of me knew that everything would fall into place and I would somehow figure it out. Because if we're resourceful enough and we're open enough to ask for help, we'll learn along the way. And so I decided suddenly that Shanghai was my mentor, and I started to observe the space around me as I began to navigate this unknown world. And here's one of the first things that I learned. You have to be aggressive. The world will not slow down for you, especially not China. If you are in someone's way, you will get out of their way very quickly. And if you slow down too much and you dwell on what you can't do instead of focus on what you can, you will be run over and superseded by someone who can. And it was a lesson that was very evident to me both in my business and my work, as well as navigating the metro at 8 a.m. during rush hour. Shame is a decision. If you want to dance in the public park, you do that. If you want to wear your PJs out to get groceries, totally okay. And when you get hot, if a crop top is the only answer, go for it. Totally fine. Although, unfortunately, I didn't find anyone with like rock solid abs. It was always the beer gut. I also learned a lot about impermanence. This is right behind my apartment. I don't know if you can tell, there's a little community over here. And it was an arts district. And I also learned that my apartment walls are very thin because all of a sudden construction started and I couldn't hear myself think at night. But I realized, because I used to walk through this art district to get to work every day. The metro was on the other side of it. And every day I walked through there, I thought, this would be such a great place to do some photography, to do some video work, to just come and hang out and sit and enjoy. But I was always too busy. I always had a reason that I had to walk right through and get home, or walk right through and get to work. And then one day there was a fence with a chain on it, and I couldn't access it. And the next day, this was my view. Shanghai literally destroys buildings overnight. It does not wait for anyone to take one last look. And if there was anything I learned in this, is that when the opportunity is there, you have to take it. Just like I did with this entire trip to Asia, I took it without any other questions. Well, obviously, insurance, travel visa, And so I started to realize that there was this really significant piece in my life that I was learning but didn't know I would quite need yet. So I'll take you back to the building blocks. That impermanence of being able to build something magnificent and tear it all down, and usually it's on our own free will, but have you ever had a sibling come through and just whoom? My blocks began to tumble. I was about 2 weeks into my job when I realized that something wasn't right. I didn't have an office key, I didn't have an email, I didn't have a desk, I didn't have a laptop. Did I say I didn't have I didn't have an email. And my boss wasn't even in the country. I showed up to work with no work to work on, so I just did my own thing. I taught myself how to code a little bit, worked on my website development, and just kind of hung out for a little bit. And then the interviews started, and they were here and there every once in a while. And before I had boarded my plane to go over to Shanghai, I got this wonderful email from him that said, "We already have trips confirmed to Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, and Indonesia." And I was like, yes, I'm going places. I get there and there's nothing booked. There's no inclination that he was going to book anything. And so I kept asking him, when does this travel thing start? Because, I'm being paid $7 an hour and the rest of it's supposed to come from travel. And he just kept saying, oh, we'll work on it. Well, month and a half in, still hadn't gone anywhere. And I started to ask my coworkers, can I trust him? Is he really going to follow through? And somehow within the last year, the 6-month internship that I had was a completely different experience than the man that I was now working for, who would constantly publicly degrade me. He would take my work and hold it against me. He would insult me in front of these business leaders that we were interviewing. He would use me as the butt of his joke to every presentation. He would call me a useless millennial or a lazy millennial or a what was the other? I can't think of it. It's not important. I've shoved it so far from my mind because I never want to remember it again. But he kept using this term millennial as a negative thing, like I was a drag on society. He would hold my personal works against me in the workplace, and he would belittle me in front of all of my coworkers. And then he didn't plan any travel. And the only reason I got to Hong Kong and Thailand was because if I didn't, my work visa or my travel visa would expire. And so I started to realize that there was something missing here. And I was fighting heads with someone who really didn't seem to want me there. And constantly I woke up angry and depressed in a city that was so full of opportunity and excitement. And I realized that I had found myself in a difficult situation. But the moment that I sat across from him and he told me that I could easily be replaced by 2 Chinese women for the same price of $7 an hour, I realized that something was very wrong. And I was working for a man who did not have a moral compass. So my roommate in Shanghai asked me 3 very hard questions. Well, 2 of them weren't really hard. Is it helping your finances? Not really. I'm making $7 an hour, and I got 1 trip out of him at the time. So it wasn't really being compensated otherwise. She said, is it benefiting your career? I said, honestly, I haven't produced anything that I feel good enough about to show a potential future employer, so no. And what about your personal well-being? I fought myself in this moment because I thought I should be grateful. I'm here in this international city, so full of opportunity and networking opportunities that I shouldn't be hating what I'm doing right now. I should be grateful for him, for the job, for the opportunity. But then I remembered that I was waking up every day sad and angry with myself for letting this happen, with him for taking advantage of me, and for the entire situation allowing to spin out of control, and for those building blocks to come tumbling down so hard it hurt. I was heartbroken. So I decided to make lemonade. I don't like lemonade, but this is a really good analogy. I decided, you know what, it's not worth those 3 things. It's not worth not having any kind of stability with your finances. It's not worth not getting anywhere else with your career, not progressing as you see yourself wanting to. And it's certainly not worth waking up every day feeling miserable in a city that is so awesome. And so I made the tough decision. I had $3,000 in my savings that I was saving for paying my student loans, which ironically, the first payment due for my student loans was the day that I arrived back in the States from China. So that's just rubbing in the salt a little bit. I decided to take that money and start traveling. I wanted to do what I had really come to do, which was to tell stories, to travel, to connect, and to discover myself and my abilities. So I booked this trip to Western China as a test. I took a train from Shanghai to Xi'an, where I saw the terracotta warriors. I took a train from Xi'an to Lanzhou, where I literally spent a day just walking across the city and seeing where I could get to. Then I took a train from there to Dunhuang, where I touched the sands of the Gobi Desert and connected with people sans English. It was very strange. I took a plane from Dunhuang to Lishan, to Chengdu, and then down to Lishan, about an hour and a half away, where I met some phenomenal people and got to see some adorable giant pandas. And then I flew back home to kind of replan and figure out where I was headed next. Now, I wasn't prepared for backpacking. I was prepared for a business trip. So fortunately, that was one of my primary pieces of luggage. Otherwise, I would have been a little bit between a rock and a hard place because I didn't have a very easy way to travel. So I stuffed as much stuff as I possibly could in that backpack, cut it down to 4 pairs of pants and a couple shirts, and went the bare minimum. And it was actually a really enlightening experience, and I'll tell you why. So this was on the train to Xi'an. I met a woman named Niu, and she was a Chinese mother traveling to Xi'an for a history conference. And we met because I had gotten bored on the train and started looking over her shoulder at what she was doing on her phone because I didn't know what else to do with myself. And she was scrolling through some social media sites. And has anyone seen the trend of the dad bod fanny pack? It's a brilliantly designed fanny pack that looks like a gut. So when you wear it, it looks like a gut. It's just hanging out of your shirt. And she laughed. If you have time to Google it, I highly recommend it. It's very comical. And so she laughed, and she kind of went back in her seat, and at that point in time, she saw me looking at her. And I thought that she would turn and become very shy and withdrawn because I was taking over her social media scrolling. But instead, she looked at me, she had this bright smile on her face, and she pulled out her translation apps and started typing like a mad woman. We proceeded to talk for the next 6.5 hours over translation. Hers a Chinese version of my Google Translate. And then at one point I got up to go to the food cart because I was getting really hungry and I really didn't want to start in on the enormous amount of Cliff Bars that I had packed because I was going to need those for quite a longer while. And when I came back from the food cart, because there were things like, there were chicken feet, a lot of vacuum-packed things that I couldn't identify. I came back from the dining car with a tea, and she did not think that that was a very good thing. So she started begging me if she could take me to the dining car to buy me food. She started asking me if I would come stay with her in her home. She wanted to feed me and take care of me. And finally, after so many offers of her trying to get me to eat food, she literally offered me a bite of what appeared to be a burrito. She was eating it, and she offered me a bite because I was refusing everything else that she wanted to give me. And I thought, if that's not close proximity in like 10 minutes, I don't know what is. So she finally offered me this yellow vacuum-sealed thing. And I thought, okay, I don't know if I'm falling into the culture norms here, but I'll accept this gift from you. But then she waited and watched as she wanted me to eat it. And so I pulled open this package, and it was like a meat shop just exploded underneath my nose. And I pushed into the package and up slid this very like slimy, dark blob. And I thought, oh, God. And so she kind of told me to be careful, and so I took a little nibble, and it wasn't bad. It was really spicy, but it wasn't the best thing I've ever tasted, but it wasn't half bad. And she looked so excited as I ate it, and then I finally finished, and she went, "Is it good?" And so I gave her the classic thumbs up, because what am I going to do? Tell her it was horrible, or that I didn't like it, or that it was eh? And so she gives me an entire Costco-sized bag of mini bags of that mystery meat. She was so pleased with herself. So we continued talking about her son, and I'm pretty sure she was trying to arrange a marriage for me, but if it was, I was all but lost in translation. And by the time we got to Xi'an, and we were all getting off the train, she looked at me in my thin black jacket and sweatpants, and she went like this. And she looked very worried. Same look my mom gives me. And everyone around me was putting on heavy winter coats and scarves, and I was waiting for earmuffs to pop out somewhere. And she was like, you're gonna be cold. And I thought, nah, it's fine. I mean, Chinese are known for being unusually cold because 65 to them is like winter. And I am from the States, so I can endure anything under 70. I get onto the train platform, and boy, was I wrong. I didn't know that 7 hours worth could make such a difference, and it was cold, and it was rainy, and I was freezing. And before we parted ways on the train platform, she pulled out from her suitcase that yellow scarf. And she stood on her tippy toes, and she wrapped it around my neck and gave me a look that said, "You idiot, now don't get cold." And it opened my eyes to so many other people who came along my path because, like Mew, she was my Gui Ren. She came into my life in a moment I didn't even know I needed her. And she fed me and quite literally clothed me. I sent her a picture of the winter jacket that I bought in Xi'an. In Dunhuang, I took a sleeper train, a 14-hour sleeper train, from Lanzhou to Dunhuang. A very interesting experience. And in Dunhuang, I went to the Gobi Desert, and I decided that this would be a really cool place to shoot some yoga shots because surrounded by sand, you don't see that very frequently in Columbus, Ohio. And as I was doing that, this local came up to me, and she just kind of did the usual, I'm gonna watch you and pretend like you can't see me, but you can obviously see me, and now I'm gonna take all the pictures that I can and send videos to my friends. That happened very frequently everywhere that I went. And all of a sudden she walked up and she took my hand and she went like this. I thought, I don't really know what you're saying, but okay. And she started to guide me into different yoga poses. And we did yoga together on this sand mountain, not being able to speak a single word of English to each other. And it was one of the coolest experiences that I've ever had because we were connected through movement and through a common understanding of what yoga and the foundation of yoga was. And all of a sudden, this picture came out of it. And it's honestly, it still touches my heart. We couldn't communicate, but through our yoga movements, and it was just truly phenomenal. In Leshan, an hour and a half south of Chengdu, we went into this small village where we met locals who told stories about the Cultural Revolution. They told stories about their family and how they made tea, and we got to enter this man's house and there's a whole story of it, and I wish I could tell you the whole thing now, but his body was older than his mind, is what all of the neighbors said. He wasn't quite there in the mind, but he was there physically to tell us his story. And our tour guide was translating that this man had been born in this house that was built by his great-grandfather. So generations and generations have lived through there. He was able to point out the room that he was born, and he was telling us a story about his brother who had joined the Red Army and had fled to Taiwan when things went awry. And his mother spent years and years mourning the loss of his brother and her son and taking things to his grave to burn and offer for him in the afterlife. And right before she passed, she received a letter from Taiwan that her son was well and alive. And she quietly passed and was now buried back in that home where he continued to live with his mother. And I realized that the vulnerability of these people to allow these strangers into their home, to quite literally have tea with them and share their stories was such an honor that I couldn't share with others. They were willing to invite us into their personal lives and tell us their phenomenal, moving, heartfelt stories simply because we were curious enough to ask and to learn. And then I went parasailing. I went to Malaysia, and I was sitting on the beach the first day I got there, and I was watching people go back and forth in the parasails, and I thought, oh, that's got to be the biggest tourist ripoff I've ever seen. And so I went over to the guys, and of course it was an outrageous price, like $50 or something, to go up for 10 minutes in a parasail. And I was like, guys, come on. I've lived in Asia. You can't do this to me. And so it was a really good group of young guys, and they were really funny about it. And so finally I got them down to a reasonable price, I think maybe $15-20. And this guy went up with me, and I learned that his name was Zaman. And by the time we got back down, we were sitting there on the beach kind of quietly talking. He wasn't all that outgoing. And he asked me if I'd been to Monkey Beach. And I had not, and I wasn't really planning on going, but he said, well, why don't you go hiking with me tomorrow? And I thought, well, now that's not going to terrify my parents. I don't know what will. So I not went hiking with him, but I got onto the back of his motorbike to get there. And I thought, okay, it's a straight line to the national park. I know right where we're going. If he turns anywhere different, I'll hop off. I don't know. I'll take it from there. And of course, halfway down the road, he turns left, and I go into panic mode. And I think I really should have told my parents where I was going before I got onto the stranger's motorbike. And he ended up taking me all around the island of Penang to all the places that I wouldn't have otherwise had time to see. He took me to the butterfly gardens. He took me to up to the top of the durian farms and had me try the stinkiest fruit in the world, which is an experience in of itself. And then on the way back down, he took me to a hidden waterfall too, something I never would have found on my own. And then on the way back down, he pulled over to the side of the road, and I thought that that was surely the end of me. He hopped off, and he looked at me and he said, "Your turn." And I was like, "What?" He said, "Your turn." And I thought he must be losing it because he was giving his motorbike, his one way of transportation all over the island, to a complete stranger. But I was an avid traveler, and so I hopped on and I went, all right, let's do this thing. And I started taking off down the mountain without him. And I went back and I picked him up and, what's that?
Oh my gosh.
Yes, yeah. And so I went back and I picked him up, and I thought he was going to get back on the front so we could drive off to the national park, but he hopped on the back, and that was one of the images that you saw was me driving around the island of Penang with Zaman on the back, like totally Eat, Pray, Love version of Malaysia. And I was in heaven. I didn't realize that this could be a kind of relationship that would come out of going parasailing on an island with a man who I could communicate with, but not very in depth. And by the time we got through with our hike and we got to the top of this lighthouse on the island of Penang, it was like he read my mind. And he turned to me and he said, "You have to trust to be happy. If you trust everyone, you risk heartbreak. But if you trust no one, you guarantee loneliness." And that has been the underlying phrase for every single thing that I have done with my life since. Do you risk heartbreak or do you guarantee loneliness? And then I met a wonderful group of students in Siem Reap, Cambodia, who are, and there's so much about this frozen yogurt shop that I love in addition to the fact that they serve frozen yogurt. I passed it up, they were handing out samples, and I kind of did the whole breeze by, I'll take a sample, I might be back later. And then on the way back from dinner, we did stop, and they started talking to us. And they told us stories about how each of these students were either volunteers or paid workers who came from a life of poverty and were learning about business skills and leadership skills to help bring them and their families into a new life. They not only are creating better lives for themselves through this scholarship and education program, but they're also bettering the lives of tons of rural members of the Siem Reap community. They're doing community work and building houses. They're providing food and education. And to hear these students tell their stories of their families back home and how they had to move to a different city to work at the age of 14 to send money back home. And then they found this amazing opportunity with the Cambodia Rural Students Trust that gave them an ability to help create a foundation for them and their families to now live on was just truly inspiring. So all of their stories are stories that I hold near and dear to my heart as well. All of these stories were extraordinary, but they were stories that at first glance look pretty ordinary. They're you, they're me, they're people we see in the grocery store or at work, they're people we kind of nod hello to but don't really go in depth with. Every single person that I met not only had an extraordinary story to tell me, but created an extraordinary story with me. And it's a story that I now am thrilled to tell over and over and over again because these are stories that changed my life and altered my perspective about everything in the world around me. These extraordinary stories of ordinary people are what will be in Goi Ren when it comes out at the end of this summer. Forbid nothing happen. I learned some very key things. Your foundation will tremble, but you will be rebuilt. Whether that's being rebuilt by someone else, somewhere else, or rebuilding yourself in the same place or somewhere new. Those building blocks can be restructured and recreated into something you could have never, ever imagined. There is always a choice, even if it's not an easy one to make. I had to make 2 tough decisions. Well, very many tough decisions, but 2 major ones that come to mind. 1, do I leave the possibility of a secure future after my postgraduate life and just get a 9-to-5 and start doing my grunt work? Or do I take adventure? And then, when I took adventure, do I stay with the job because it's the only security that I have? Or do I take my money and I start doing the thing that I really want to do and know and trust that things will work out as it needs to later? I traveled to all of those countries. I traveled to Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand. Well, Thailand was with work. Indonesia, Taiwan, I think I'm repeating myself here, Malaysia, Singapore, and Western China, all on $2,000. I stayed in hostels, I took trains, I budgeted where I could, but in all reality, it was so easy to travel that to travel was the obvious answer to take. Impermanence is far more of a blessing than a curse. Who here has felt like the pain in their life will just never go away? There will always be something that is wrong. Anyone can totally admit that. How many feels like your joy can be taken away with you in the split second? Both of those are impermanent, though. Just as your joy can be ripped away from you, so too can your pain. But it's making a decision to make a change, to take a different path, or let go of something. And that was a huge factor in every decision that I made over in Asia, was realizing that what's bad right now doesn't have to be bad tomorrow. You are extraordinary. Everything that you do, everything that you say, everything that you wear, everything that you share with everyone around you is a story. And your story is part of such bigger of a story than you realize. And I walked away from Asia realizing not only that these such extraordinarily ordinary people had something extraordinary to offer. And those stories have helped shape my life since, and every relationship that has come out of that since. All of this is going into Gui Ren. It has been a 1.5 worth of working, but the book is written, it's in the editing stages. I'm very excited to bring it to everyone. It's another act of vulnerability to share all of these in-depth stories and allow you to enter the world of all of these individuals that I met. And unfortunately, there are so many that I probably could write a trilogy or a several book series at minimum, because there were so many people that helped shape my path, whether it was taking the extra time to help translate something for me in the grocery store, or putting up with my charade rendition of where is the chicken? I need chicken, rice. The people who taught me the skills that I walked away with without even knowing it. And realizing that you don't have to book an international ticket to have these experiences. They're right outside your front door. They're in your workplace. They're in the places that you go for your groceries and your clothes. Every connection that you make is an opportunity to find your Gui Ren. But I don't believe that it's something that you should be looking for, because Gui Ren happens naturally. It happens when people come into your life synchronistically. It happens when you're least expecting it and may not even realize it at that time. Does anyone feel like they've had someone in their life like that? You guys are really bad at raising your hands. You're really good nodders, but show me some support here. And ever since I've gotten back, I've found more and more and more of these people. I went to a conference last weekend. I was honored to have a scholarship to attend the Northlands Confabulation. It's a storytelling network that allows us to kind of practice the art of storytelling and hear what other people are doing with that career path. And I felt so honored to have that opportunity, and I had wonderful conversations with people, and I learned so much at these workshops. And I just got an email yesterday that said, you have a benefactor. Someone you spoke with wants to pay your way next year. I just got goosebumps. And I was like, I don't know who it could have been, and I probably will never know, who knows? But because I was myself and I was doing something authentic to me and sharing my story and hearing other people's, somewhere there was a spark and someone knew that that was a step that I needed to take. It's everywhere. The possibilities are endless. There is so much more content that I wish I had the time to share with you, but I do want to leave some time for discussion because I think there's a lot of dense, heavy topics in here, and I want to know what you think. So if you're interested to know, I do have business cards over there. I also have an email list. I'm going to be sending out some emails with some more content for you and some opportunities to connect. So please feel free to share your email with me. I won't spam you, I promise. I don't have time for that. I also just recently did a podcast on Edge of Comfort that was really exciting. It is an hour and a half worth of talking a little bit more about not only what Gui Ren means to me, but also the experiences of vulnerability and traveling alone as a female, as a young female. And so this podcast, I would certainly recommend it. Judy has listened to it 3 times. She shared with me already. Or feel free to connect with me on any of my social media. I'm just excited to not only share these stories with you, to enlighten you about what I've learned, but also learn what you have input on from your own life experiences, because stories are not stories worth telling if they can't play off of each other and become something even greater. So thank you so much again for joining me. I know there's so much more I wish I could tell you, but I'd like to leave time for questions. I know you guys are really bad at raising your hands, but like.
Okay, how did you leave your job? How did that work?
I started to ask him actually if I could just go back to working remotely, but because I didn't have the equipment that I needed, I would have to borrow some. And as soon as I asked that, he stopped answering my text messages, and so I didn't actually get an opportunity to quit. I was just kind of shunned, and I took that as a hint that I was done. So I had this whole resignation, this professional resignation planned, and didn't even have the chance to execute it. I did get paid, although there was frequently money missing because he miscommunicated with, he didn't quite understand how electronic payments worked, and because of that I suffered, and I had to ask many times before the paycheck actually arrived. So it was irregular and sporadic, and it didn't necessarily have all the funds, but I did get paid. Any other questions? Yeah.
I'd like to learn about your lodging. How far in advance would you set up a hotel or a hostel? Or was hostel primarily where you stayed?
I did stay in mostly hostels, although you can find some very cheap hotels in Asia. The hotel that I stayed at in Dunhuang was $20 a night, and it was practically a 5-star. So you can find pretty cheap hotels, but I stuck mostly with the $6 or $7 a night hostels.
What about safety and security of staying in a hotel by yourself?
Absolutely. So the hotel I was less worried about because I had a door that locked and closed, and I could leave all my things inside of it. As far as the hostel goes, I did book a couple private rooms every once in a while if it was cheap enough. Otherwise, I booked dorms where I stayed with other people, some co-ed, some non. I stuck with female dorms in the beginning just because I myself was a little unsure of what that would be like. But they have storage lockers. I looked for facilities that had storage lockers that you could either rent or take your own lock so that you had a space to put your things in during the day. I also looked for places that had breakfast, but that's just, my mind is on food. And then the rest of it was, really just trust. As long as my things were okay and locked in a place, I really didn't feel unsafe at any point in time. Everywhere that I went, people were more than accommodating and friendly, and I didn't run into any issues. So I don't know if that answers your safety question, but definitely looking for a place that has lockers. I prefer to have the lockers on the inside of my room instead of down in the lobby. Some hostels have the lockers in the lobby. Yeah.
Would you take anything with you for safety? Let's say you did get into trouble. Did you have anything that could have...
Taser.
Taser would have been great. Yes.
Right.
I mean, did you have anything in case you got into a situation?
I had my fists.
You had nothing?
No, I didn't really have anything. I was really unprepared, like I said, for backpacking at least. But my first weapon was my intuition. So if anything in my gut had said that getting onto the back of that motorbike would be a mistake, I wouldn't have done it.
Right.
And I think that that's something that we develop over time as we practice vulnerability and as we make ourselves open to these opportunities to connect. We start to get a read of how people are and the right kind of people and the energy that you get, because I do believe in energies and being able to read whether a person is going to connect with you well or not. I certainly met several people along the way that I had one very brief conversation or interaction with, and I went, you know what, I'm going to go over this way.
Yeah.
So my first safety device was my intuition. Absolutely. Yeah.
Was this all done on your own? Did you ever have any friends come and spend any time with you during that amount of time?
I did. My mother actually came to Shanghai to visit me over Thanksgiving. It had been planned a little bit further than before I started traveling. So she came to spend Thanksgiving with us. And then my boyfriend came over for a week during our October holiday. So I was employed and then quit my job, and then he came for a week, and then I started traveling after. So I did have some company, yes. As far as the traveling goes, though, I was all by myself. Yeah.
So after grad school, I went to China for a couple weeks with my friend who spoke Mandarin.
Yeah.
And everyone seemed to have a very hard time understanding her because of her accent, her dialect, whatever it may be. And it was frustrating for us because here I am in this country with someone who speaks the language. She's pretty fluent, and people are still pretending that they can't understand her. So you didn't have that problem, obviously, because you didn't speak Mandarin.
I did, though. Well, I don't speak Mandarin, but I did have that problem.
Yeah.
Because, especially in Shanghai, I think in big cities, tourists get really annoying.
Yes.
And so I would frequently go into grocery stores where I would have something translated, or I would play chicken, like I just need food, or I would try to mime what I needed, and they would just give me one of these, like, they just didn't want to talk, they didn't want to have the patience to communicate. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we could actually speak the same language, there was a lack of desire to help.
Right. And my other question,
yes.
Well, that was a comment, I guess, because I wonder what your experience
but
was.
a very good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the toilets? Like, I'm serious, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I'll show
there
you
are
a picture of
holes
a
in
squatty
the
potty.
ground, and my friend fell in the hole one time.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine? She fell in the
fell?
hole.
Nope.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nope.
So
Nope.
you're out in public. That's all you got is a hole, and the restrooms are not
Nope.
clean.
Nope.
At all, ever.
Yeah.
And so you could walk by a public restroom, and you're like almost to the point of hurling.
Mm-hmm.
So I wondered, how did you cope with that? Did you just hold
How
it
long
for
ago
like
were
2
you there?
months? I was here in 2016.
16, so that's totally.
Yeah.
Did you really hold it? Because I would have held it for I did hold it for 2
Yeah.
months basically.
You know, I started going to the gym right before I left, and I kept going to the gym while I was over there, and I will say that my leg workouts paid off because it was a lot of squatting. And I have one particular part, I'm going to keep it in the book because it's comical, but I was carrying this backpack with this backpack on my front and still managed to use a squatty potty. It can be done, it's just very difficult. So you make do with what you have. I mean, it was kind of forced upon me once you start traveling and you're staying in cheaper places. Fortunately, the hostels and the hotels had Western accommodations. Some of the trains that I booked had Western accommodations, and by Western accommodations, I mean a toilet. Not all of them had toilet paper, so that was something that you learn to just keep with you. Anytime you see tissues, you grab them and you stick them in your bag. But as far as the toilets went, it was just something that you have to just kind of suck up and do, because it's very hard to find a Western toilet anywhere. So.
What was that stuff you ate?
Did you ever find
Which,
out what
in the video,
That woman gave you?
On the train.
it was. I believe it was braised duck neck jerky. That is the conclusion I have come from.
And she brought some home. You want some?
I still have a packet. That's the conclusion I came to after hours of searching the name of it on Google and trying to translate it. And it's one specific company that's well known from the region that she's from, which is Anhui. And I tried endlessly to figure out exactly what was in that packet, and I still can't be sure. So, but I did try a lot of interesting things. Yeah.
How did you handle money? Did you carry cash? Did they take credit cards where you were traveling?
In China, it was very easy. WeChat is also, it works like Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, any of those money transferring apps. So, I mean, my mom and I in Beijing, we were at the Summer Palace, and we didn't realize that we needed cash to get in, and I didn't have cash. So I went up to a stranger, and I showed him my phone and showed him that he could scan me, I would scan him, I would send him electronic, and he would give me, it was like a mobile ATM everywhere you went. It was wonderful. So in China, that was very easy. In other places, I had a Charles Schwab account, and they have 0 ATM fees all around the world. And so I just used my Charles Schwab and withdrew a little bit of money at a time. I didn't want to go overboard and accidentally overdraw too much. But just kind of kept conscious mind of how much the conversion would be so that I didn't totally empty out the account. But I was so much on a budget that it was really hard to do. Yeah.
How about foods that you would eat? I just had a friend come back just from Mexico who got a parasite. I mean, you were eating things that were really different.
Yeah.
And vaccinations, did you have to get a lot of shots before you went?
I had some from the previous summer that were still good, but I did have to get a couple extras, which I hate needles, so whatever. Wasn't too happy about that. But took a lot of medication with me, malaria medication, a whole lot of other, gross medications we don't have to talk about. But I honestly, the biggest thing was not drinking the water, and then the second biggest thing was not eating anything that had been soaked in the water. So some fruits and vegetables you have to be careful of. A lot of the fresh fruits and vegetables, if you go to what would be considered a wet market where everything is fresh, you have to be careful with what water that was soaked in. So fortunately in China, and particularly in Shanghai or in the bigger cities that I went to around Asia, a big movement is clean eating. So a lot of places bragged about having filtered water. They would cook their noodles in it, and those were the places that we tended to go. And honestly, it wasn't even that much more expensive, so it's not like eating organic versus fast food. So I was just very conscientious of where I was eating and what kinds of food that I was eating. I ate a lot of carbs. Fortunately, no.
Good.
I did get sick with an undiagnosed sinus infection, but that was not from the food.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a whole mess. I thought I had bed bugs because I had this Asian rash all over me, and it was wonderful.
What was it?
It was just an untreated sinus infection, I think. Yeah, a lot of, apparently, because my cousins lived in Shanghai, and she said that her kids never got rashes with their illnesses until they moved over to China, and for some reason, a lot of expats living in China will get rashes with their illnesses. So I thought I had bed bugs and freaked out everyone in the hostel. It's a whole thing. Yeah.
They have like 7-Elevens over in China. They got a bunch of them over in Thailand. Is there a comparable store there in China? A chain or anything?
Yes.
Yeah.
All over the place. There were a bunch of different brands, though. I can't think of one off the top of my head that would be comparable to 7-Eleven. Because 7-Eleven is more like a gas station. The stores that we would see would be more like convenience stores, one step above a gas station. But yes, certainly tons of corner stores all over the place that made it very convenient to get.
Yeah.
I actually bought a 7-Eleven tank top in Thailand because it was just so much. I mean, every street corner there was a 7-Eleven.
Yeah, 3 or 4 on every block.
Yeah. Judy, did you have a question?
Okay, this would be kind of like, now you're the experienced traveler, you had all this, so this experienced Erin that's had all these experience, and if you could go back and talk to the original Erin that first got on the plane with all this experience, what would you tell her?
I think she knew. As cheesy as that sounds, I think she knew. I've been wearing My Intent bracelets for some years now, and if you haven't heard of My Intent, they're a bracelet where you can stamp a word that means something to you, and something that you want to work on in your life. And so the first word that I got was wanderlust. My best friend from college bought me one that said wanderlust, and in that 2-year span that it survived on my wrist, I traveled all over, I took opportunities, and I decided to go to China. And right before I left for China, it broke. And so I ordered a new one, and I chose the word synchronicity. And I don't know how I knew that everything was going to happen for a reason, but I wore that bracelet on my wrist all the way through China and then back. And it just broke December of last year. And somehow I think she knew. Yeah.
Where are you off to next?
all over the place. I was talking about South Africa earlier. I'd also really like to go to Spain. That's been high up on the list for years. But oh my gosh, I could just go on. It's everywhere I haven't been. I was telling this story to someone the other day about how when I was little, we would take road trips to go see family, and I would sit in the car in the back seat imagining myself walking every inch of the earth until there was no more inches to discover. And of course that was highly unrealistic in the eyes of a 4-year-old, or highly realistic if you will, but unrealistic now. And so I think that there's still, beneath my skin somewhere, there's that urge to see every last corner of the world. I know it probably won't happen, but now I've discovered that seeing the world is so much more than actually getting there. It's connecting with the people that are close to you. Because all of you in this room have already told me a story, and multiple of you have told me stories about places you've been that are international that I may not go to. But I've been there because you've been there, and I'm connecting and chatting with you about it. Yeah.
Did you keep in touch like with the lady that gave you that mystery meet and stuff like that? Did you keep in touch with some of the people you met in your travels?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Some of them more so than others. My roommate, certainly we talk every once in a while, and Zaman every once in a while will send me one of those corny forward messages on Facebook that somehow circulate and come all the way from Malaysia. And every once in a while someone will reach out to me and we'll chat for a little bit. Yeah, so it's been cool to kind of, I actually messaged you the other day with a picture. I keep that scarf strung up around my desk at home where I typically sit and write, and so I sent her a picture of that and just thanked her again, and she said something beautiful that now I would totally botch if I said it, but it was something along the lines of special friends come from special places or something like that, and that was all it took. I knew she knew that I was grateful. Yeah.
Since you didn't speak the language, how big of an impact was having electronics like Google and things like that for you to communicate with people? Did you ever miss speaking to people?
That's actually a very interesting question. So one, yes, electronics, they get you so far. They really do help. So there's a program called Maps.me. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an offline map program, so you can download maps of the places that you're going to go and then see in real time where you're navigating to. So even in the back of a taxi, as long as you download it in Wi-Fi, you have that ability to see where you're at, which became crucial to me when a random Thai woman stuck me in a taxi and said, "I'll get you there," and then mumbled something to the taxi driver, and I was sitting in the back seat going, okay, guess I'm going here. So I could at least keep track of where I was at. But I only got a SIM card in probably 2 countries, and that's because I was there for a longer period of time. I didn't really use data any other time. I downloaded the maps ahead of time, and then the translation apps you can download as well, the dictionary that you'd need. But I did have a very interesting connection with someone. I was in Shanghai taking some photography on the Bund, and he came up to me and started, looking at my camera, and it was very clear to me that he didn't speak English, and he could tell that I didn't speak Mandarin, but he wanted to introduce himself, and so he pointed to my purse, and I understood that he was looking for my phone, that he wanted to connect on WeChat. And WeChat has a built-in translation system. And so we started introducing ourselves to each other on WeChat and interacting very little in verbal communication. And so I write about it in Gui Ren about the experience of having a conversation with someone while stuck with my head in my phone, because so frequently we try to put down our phones to interact with each other. And that was the only way that I could interact with him, was sticking my head in my phone. And it was a very jarring thing to do. Because even still, I feel like I don't fully know him because I was missing that. Yeah, the body language, everything matters. And so it was kind of an interesting experiment in communication. Yeah.
Did you come across anyone who did speak English?
Oh, yeah. Far fewer out in Western China. The further out west that I got, the signs weren't in, typically they'll have the pinyin, the English spelling of the Chinese character, but the further out west that I got, the far fewer in between were the English letters. But then pretty much everywhere else that I went, I could find at least one or two people that spoke English, whether that was in the hostel, simply out of necessity, because they know that travelers are going to be coming through, and English is such a dominant language in the world that that's typically the first one people go to. So at least I had the hostel workers or a tour guide, which I didn't frequently do tours simply because I didn't really want to follow around someone with a megaphone all day. But when I did tours, they were more close-knit. It was me and a friend, and they were able to act as a translator for us. So I didn't really have a hard time finding English speakers. Any other questions?
Did you go over again who this gentleman was and hired you?
He was an American. He'd been living in China for 50... Yeah, I know, that makes it even worse, right? That's most of the reactions I get was, oh, well, he must have been Chinese. Because in Chinese business, it's very common to have businessmen give you promises and not follow through. That's apparently very common, and I learned a lot about that while I was over there, because I started asking questions of why do people assume that he's Chinese, and it was explained to me that his behavior sounds more like a Chinese businessman than it does an American businessman. But no, he's from America. He had been living over there for 15 years by the time that I was over there, and something was going on in his life that part of me wishes I could empathize with. The other part of me really doesn't want to know, because he wasn't handling it in the most elegant of ways. He hurt a lot of people in his path. I don't know what he's doing today. I'm certain that the business is still there, but even my coworkers were very disgruntled by the change in behavior and tried to empathize with me the best that they could, because he wasn't the same person.
I think Business Karma Incorporated or something like that.
I'm a true believer that what he has coming will teach him a lesson.
Sure it will.
Whatever that may be.
You may not know it, but it will.
Yes, yeah.
We hear a lot about pollution in China. Did you see that smog, or did you?
I would say there were probably a handful of really bad days where I actually did wear my mask. But honestly, it mostly just felt a little bit like I wouldn't work out outside. I wouldn't go for a run outside because you'd notice the difference in your ability to breathe. But as far as an everyday basis, the only day that I really noticed it was if my allergies were acting up. But that just felt like allergies. I'd say 9 times out of 10 it was an okay day. It was usually on the scale of 1 to 10 of this is incredibly polluted and you need to stay inside all day. It was usually a 4 or 5 on the lower end. Every once in a while it would get up to a 6 or 7.
And did you miss the rainy season? Because isn't there like a big monsoon season? I remember from like Forrest Gump movie.
There is a rainy season. I don't know where trust me, it certainly rained in China. But I don't know where I was.
There's supposed to be some kind of rain that just comes and goes on and on for days, maybe spring.
Not that I noticed.
Oh, okay.
If it isn't, I was there from June to December. I'm not sure where that is. Isn't it typically in the beginning of the year? I think. But that's not to say that I didn't get caught in it, because I was headed back somewhere in Bangkok. I was headed back to my hostel, and I got off the metro, and it was just drizzling, and then all of a sudden I was walking, and I had this little, very thin, free poncho on, and it was what you would define as a monsoon. My tennis shoes were soaked for 3 days. That's why they were drying, if you saw them hanging from my backpack, because everything that I had on me was soaked. It was the hardest rain I have ever experienced in my life. So I did experience it, but not to the degree of preventing me from doing anything because of the weather. So I was very fortunate in that. Yeah.
I know that 20 or 30 years ago, a Westerner who was blonde was often accosted in China that people wanted to touch her hair. Is that gone now?
Oh, no. I'm pretty sure I'm in Christmas cards somewhere.
So people were mostly wanting to take pictures of your hair? Did they want to touch it?
A couple of people would come up and touch. It was a motherly kind of typically there were women, and it was very motherly. It was like oh, you're so pretty, so pretty. But it wasn't ever, I never felt uncomfortable. Men never touched my hair. I think that would probably be weird. Then I would kind of be like, all right, I'm just gonna walk this way. But yes, tons of pictures, whether I liked it or not. And I realize it's over time, but if anyone does want to stay, I'm happy to hang out and answer more questions. Yes, yeah. We went to Beijing the previous summer too, so.
That's when the sun said that smog was there.
Yeah, yeah. In November, when my mom and I went to Beijing, the smog was much better. It was winter, their version of winter,
Right.
so it was actually pretty cold.
What month did you leave your job?
I got there mid-June, and I was unemployed by 1st of October. So I should have left 2 months earlier. But I stuck around because I thought, I need to be grateful. This is going to teach me something. I'm going to change him, because what woman doesn't think she's going to change him? And I thought maybe something will change and he'll have a spark and he'll know.
How old was he?
I think he was about 45, but he looked about 60. He's an entrepreneur.
Scammer.
Constantly stressed. He's trying to put a 5-year-old kid through school, but at the point that I was over there, it was the same 5-year-old that he promised every night for months that he would put glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling and never did it. So I can't personally imagine what kind of stress and torture he was experiencing. And there is a part of my heart that wants to reach out and say, I'm so sorry that you were experiencing such pain that you felt like you had to put it on to everyone else in your life. But there's also part of me that knows that he's had enough experience to be aware that he's treating people without a certain level of respect. But anyone else have any questions or comments or stories? I love all of it.
Well, thank you.
Thank
Yeah, absolutely.